What's up, Grandmaster Igor Smirnov is here, and today we're gonna go over the bishop's opening, which happens after white places their bishop to c4, a really good opening that I do recommend that you play. And in this video we're going to check the 5 best opening traps in the bishop's opening. And the first trap will be for the black side. And it happens after black goes knight to f6 here and white responds with knight to f3. So far these were fairly standard moves, and there is one crazy thing here. After black here takes the pawn on e4, the most played move by far is knight takes e5, which is a losing mistake, hard to believe, and yet it is true. Therefore, if you're playing black, you have a great chance of winning a game just like that, because this natural move knight takes e5, which creates a threat to your pawn on f7, in fact is a losing mistake. What's the problem here? Black goes pawn to d5, so that they attack the white's bishop, and once it goes back, there is this powerful double attack which black has with queen to g5, attacking the knight as well as that crucial pawn on g2, which unlocks the opportunity to attack the white's king. Now let's think of what can white possibly do here. White realizes that they can't protect both their weaknesses simultaneously, and the most common move here is castling. White here hopes that after you take the knight, they'll play pawn to d3 and they'll happily take the knight back on the next move, because if the knight goes backwards here, then it's definitely not what you want to do, because after rook e1 you've got problems along this e-file where white attacks a lot of your valuable pieces. Therefore, knight to f6 retreat is definitely not an option. Let me place this move back. But there is a really cool thing that you can play here as black. This is a counter blow bishop d6. First of all, you're threatening checkmate in 1, queen takes h2. And after white plays pawn on g3 to stop, there is another critical move that you gotta play here. This is the move knight to g5. Really strong move, and now we'll see why. White players here usually go rook to e1. By the way, notice that pawn to f4 does not really win anything, because you can remove your knight with a tempo, knight h3 check, and after that you can just remove your queen, let's say to f5 or any other square, and the knight is safe. Therefore you'll keep your extra piece. Therefore pawn to f4 does not win a piece back. And white plays rook e1, that was their original intention. And in this case, there is this powerful move knight f3 checks, which turns the table around, and now it's not white but black who's winning immediately. White has to grab the knight, and now queen takes c1, king g2, queen takes c1. Black is literally taking everything in the white's position, and even more so, they're ready to also go here for the rook and take it as well. But anyway, you're already having such an enormous material advantage that it's definitely winning for you. There is also another sideline which is worth mentioning. After you take here the pawn on e4 and white automatically recaptures, you play pawn on d5, and here white may think that it's just a one-time attack, but then after queen g5 they realize they're in big trouble. Now another move which white may play, in addition to castle which we analyzed previously, is to retreat their knight to f3. After that you're certainly gonna take the pawn on g2, and funnily enough a lot of players here actually play rook g1, which is a standard move in some other similar positions, but of course in this case there is one major drawback. Yeah, it's queen takes f2 checkmate. So rook to g1 definitely doesn't help white. And instead, if they try rook to f1, here you can just bring your bishop either to g4 or to h3, and both moves are winning. Bishop g4 is even stronger. In this case, you're going to take this knight, and after that, the white's queen on d1 is also under the fire, and that is also completely winning for black. If white tries a little trick with knight to h4, again, there is a lot you can do here, but the simplest is to take on f1, and after that to recapture the rook on d1, therefore winning that rook on f1, which is also completely winning for black. It is time for the trap number 2, and this time we're going to see the trap for the white side. So after bishop to c4, black has a couple options: knight to f6, bishop c5, maybe knight to c6. Just to mention that I'm not going to analyze bishop c5 in this video, even though it's one of the main lines here, because I analyzed it in another video, the unbeatable bishop's opening, which I'll link down below in the video description. And I do recommend that you check this out. It got over 500,000 views, and I do share some really cool lines here. For example, here you've got a shocking move pawn to d4, which gives you a super powerful attack early in the game. Anyway, in this video we will not analyze this, just like I said previously, and we will only analyze the move knight to f6. In the previous video, we saw that after white plays knight to f3, black has this cool trap knight takes e4. And we already know that knight taking e5 is not an option for white, but then what should you do? Well, you gotta play knight to c3. In this case, you're playing in a gambit style. You sacrifice that pawn on e4, but now after this exchange, you have a significant advantage in activity. A lot of your pieces are already active here. The bishop is active, the queen is ready to jump somewhere forward, while the black's army is completely out of game, just standing there on their original squares, which already goes to show you that you have a really cool possibilities for the quick attack right here. For example, since right now the pawn on e5 is under the attack, it's very natural for black to play pawn to d6 or maybe knight to c6, the development moves which would protect this pawn. And both of these moves are losing mistakes, because after black goes either knight to c6 or pawn to d6, you're gonna reply with knight to g5. Black realizes that there is nothing they can do to stop you from capturing that pawn on f7 on the next move, and you get a winning position right away. Because you can either take with the bishop and attack opponent's king, or even better, take it with a knight, therefore delivering fork to the black's rook and queen, so you'll grab one of these pieces and it's really powerful. The only thing black can do to try to block this diagonal is playing bishop to e6. And even though in this case you can just exchange and take that pawn on e6 with your knight, which is definitely good, but there is a force in winning continuation here which is even stronger. It's the move queen to f3. Here you create a very strong checkmate threat, queen to f7, but also you're attacking that pawn on b7, and not just the pawn, you're hoping to win the rook on a8 because it's undefended. The only thing black can do here to try to cover both of his weaknesses is playing queen to d7, and after white takes on b7, then they may try queen c6. The only way to cover that rook on a8 so that it's not captured on the next move, but it fails due to this really interesting checkmating construction with the following moves: knight to f7, pretty cool checkmate with just a queen and a knight. The next trap is also from the white's perspective. Here after black goes knight f6, knight f3, black takes the pawn, and we still respond with knight to c3 in order to gain this advantage in development, in activity. After that, black goes pawn on d6, and even though we already know that knight g5 is winning here, but I still want to show you the next game just because it's so beautiful. In this game, white castled, which is less strong compared to knight to g5, and black played bishop g4, probably hoping that now at least they sorted out the problem with white's knight jumping around. But it turned out that it's not really the case, as white replied knight takes c5, all of a sudden sacrificing the queen on d1 and putting the knight under the attack. And in this case, after black captured the queen, there goes bishop takes f7, king goes, and bishop g5, and another beautiful checkmate. This time black is trying to even the score, and so the next trap is going to be for the black side. Here after black played knight to f6, white decided not to give up this pawn on e4, and instead they played queen to e2. And even though the white player of this game is Harry Pillsbury, who was one of the famous players of the past century, in fact, of course, I would not recommend that you play a move like this. Instead, what you can do, if I just move this queen e2 backwards, here instead you can go pawn to d4. Very interesting move here. Again, I don't analyze it in one lesson so that it doesn't become endless, but I already analyzed it in another video, which I'll also link down below, 4 quick checkmates in the bishop's opening, and there you can see how you can develop your attack there after the more interesting move, pawn to d4. Anyway, he played queen e2, black replied with bishop c5, pawn to c3, fairly standard move, happens a lot in the Ryla pass. Black castled and white played pawn to f4. A move which is tempting at first, as here white hopes that after the pawn goes away, white can then start kicking the black's pieces away with pawn to d4, pawn to e5, and gaining a lot of tempos and expanding in the center. And while it looks good in the game, black found a way to break through and to counterattack. Instead of taking this pawn, he replied with pawn to d5, very powerful counter blow in the center. And after white captured this pawn, black recaptured on f4 this time, and now all of a sudden rook e8 is a major threat, threatening to grab the queen because of the pin. Therefore, white played queen to f3 in order to remove this queen from the potential attack, but then black followed up with bishop takes g1 so that this knight cannot come to e2 and protect the king. So first of all, they eliminated one of the very few defenders that white actually has here in the position, and after that he played rook to e8, check, king goes to f1, and there goes knight to g4, and the threat knight takes h2 is very hard to stop actually. White played queen takes f4, which looks like a good move, and in this position black had a couple winning options, in fact, just because the white's king is so weak and vulnerable. One of the lines which I like in particular could be knight takes h2 here, deflecting the queen, and after that queen to f6 is a very unusual checkmating construction with the linear vertical checkmate happening early in the game. In fact, I think I never saw a checkmating construction just like this, and it's something really beautiful. The trap number 5 is less spectacular but really useful to know because it's one of the main lines of the bishop's opening. Here after black goes knight to f6 and white decides to protect the pawn by playing pawn to d3, black responds pawn to c6, potentially preparing d5 at some point. White here plays knight f3, the main line, and in here there's a tricky move for black, bishop to e7, which you gotta know, or you may try using as black. In this case, very often white players grab the pawn on e5, overlooking that it was actually a trap, not a blunder. After knight takes e5, black responds queen to a5 with a double attack to the king and the knight, thus winning the knight on the next move. So many players fell victim to this trap that I really wanted to share it with you. If you want to know more about the bishop's opening, then give a like to this video so that I know that you guys are interested and I'll be developing more videos about it. Also, I do recommend that you check out other videos which I mentioned in this one to deepen your knowledge about the bishop's opening so that you're really prepared all around. I'll mention them here on the screen and in the description down below.